Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest? Hi everyone, I'm Michael Bird. I'm an Australian Anglican priest, a biblical scholar, theologian. I've got my thumbs in a lot of pies. You know, I do a bit of biblical studies, a bit of systematic theology, a bit of church history, but I also do a bit of political theology where I like to think and talk about the interface between Christianity, the public square, and national and global politics. And the latest thing I guess I have to think about and report about is watching the American talk show host, you know, Tucker Carlson, the former Fox News pundit, his interview with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the special military operation in Ukraine and other commentary on global matters. Now, to his credit, I thought Carlson did ask Putin some good questions, you know, about Ukraine, about things like Nord Stream, you know, and other, you know, international matters. But Carlson failed to bring up the hard questions that someone really needs to ask Putin. You know, questions about the murder and imprisonment of Russian opposition leaders, the mass imprisonment of Russian citizens who are opposed to the war, I mean, you know, special military operation, the biological attack in Salisbury, war crimes committed by Russian troops in Ukraine, and especially the aborted coup by Yevgeny Prigozhin and Prigozhin's subsequent death. You know, I would really like to hear Putin's thoughts on those matters, but we didn't get them. You know, Carlson's interview with Putin was not really about posing tough questions to Putin. It was more about trying to make Putin look good and trying to galvanize the Republican base in favor of Russia and to try stop American support for Ukrainian resistance against Russia's invasion. Now, that became very apparent in the interview because of a number of things that were said and were mentioned. I mean, some of the things Putin did, he stressed his, firstly, his repeated offers to negotiate with Biden and Zelensky to end the war. And he's saying, like, you know, all his attempts to negotiate have been rebuffed, as if he's the dove here and they're the hawks. Secondly, he expressed admiration for George W. Bush and Donald Trump. Third, he said, you know, America should focus on its surging debt and its border crisis rather than intervene in the affairs of other countries. Fourth, he said the US government is taxing Americans to pay for the weapons and arms which are sent to Ukraine's Nazi government. Fifth, Putin said the sanctions against Russia are actually having the reverse effect. What they're actually doing is strengthening the ruble and weakening the US dollar. Sixth, Putin mentioned you know, for the Viktor Orban fans, and Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary, he implied that Orban, Hungary, would be within their right to seize a chunk of Ukraine because there is a significant Hungarian population in certain parts of Ukraine. These are the ethnic Magyars. And seventh, at the very end, there was a bit of a spiel as to how Putin is a Christian, Russia is a Christian nation doing its best to fight against the godless American and European elites. And if you take those, you know, 7 points together, it's very clear this was just red meat to the MAGA crowd. I mean, that was the main purpose of the interview. At the end of the day, Putin was pushing fanciful myths as history, conspiracy theories, nonsense claims, and, you know, fairly predictable tropes and some delusional sentiments. And Carlson was the enabler of it, giving it an international audience, speaking definitely into the American conservative context, and trying to furnish Putin's fantasies with an air of legitimacy. Now, I don't have a problem with the fact that Carlson interviewed Putin. You know, a journalist interviewing a controversial leader is no big deal. Whether that's an interview with Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela or Xi Jinping of China. I mean, that's what journalists are supposed to do. But to be brutally honest, based on the contents of the interview and Carlson's, softball questions to Putin, I haven't seen a Western journalist shill this hard for a Russian dictator since Walter Duranty, the New York Times man in Moscow, until he helped Stalin cover up the Soviet Union's famine in the Ukraine, which is why, Walter Duranty was one of Stalin's famous useful idiots. He helped hide the Ukrainian famine that killed millions. And in fact, they gave him a Pulitzer Prize for it. And to this very day, the New York Times lists Walter Duranty as one of its prize-winning journalists. I think Carlson was very much like Walter Duranty. He was simply a tool for Russian misinformation and trying to portray Russia as the victim of American aggression. And Carlson and Duranty, although they are on different sides of the political spectrum, they're, if you like, two sides of the same coin. For different reasons, they're both shilling for a corrupt, cruel, vicious, and violent Russian regime. And the thing is, that wasn't even the worst part of the interview. The worst part, for my mind, was what was said about Russian history and Russian religion. On history, the interview started weirdly. Putin, who's got a big fascination of history, said, "I just need 30 seconds to tell you about Russian history." And then he launched into a 30-minute rant about Russian history, emphasizing that Ukraine is the spiritual home of Russia and Ukraine has always been a vassal of Russia. Some of the stuff coming out of Putin's mouth was complete nonsense. Claims like Poland collaborated with Nazi Germany during World War II. Also claims like the Ukrainian government, though headed by a Jew, is a Nazi and nationalist state propped up by the USA, Britain, and European Union. He also said that the Ukrainians have never had any distinct identity, and they're not even a sovereign people. Putin says it was Lenin's era to give the Ukrainians autonomy for the first time. Now, that's utter tosh. If you want a better account of Russian history, all the way from the Kievan Rus to the post-Soviet era, my advice is check out a couple of episodes from the Rest is History podcast. Okay, they did a whole series of episodes on the history of Russia, and it was really good, really evenly balanced and fair. When it comes to Tom Holland's assessment of Vladimir Putin, and Tom Holland's a historian who's on the Rest of History podcast, this is what Tom Holland says. Basic historical facts are being sacrificed on the altar of his passionate idea of what history should be like. That sums up. Putin was not doing history as much as propaganda. That said, it was the stuff on Christianity that irked me the most. Carlson addressed Putin on one point. He said, you're a Christian leader by your own description, to which, Putin nodded, and then talked about how Russia has always been a tolerant Christian country. Putin described Russia as, basically one big interfaith happy hug fest. I mean, this is Putin's own words. This is Putin's own words. He said, people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family. And our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family. But everyone has his or her own family, and this is the basis of our society. And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other, it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland. And that is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia. Okay, look, there is a strong Orthodox tradition in Russia, deep in history, which even the communists could not crush. And there's some great Russian theologians. There's some great, Orthodox Russian priests. I've met many Russian Christians, both Orthodox, Catholic, evangelical. But one thing I know from my, basic history of Russia is Russia has never been a particularly tolerant nation, particularly not towards religious minorities. I mean, it's over the centuries persecuted Jews, Catholics, Buddhists, Protestants, and Muslims. I mean, the Tsar, the Tsar's motto was orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, which is kind of the opposite of live and let live. The Soviets persecuted various religious groups all over Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And added to that, the Russian Orthodox Church has tried to throw its weight around the global Orthodox communion in very heavy-handed ways. Now, when Putin was asked, how can a Christian leader engage in violence like the special military operation, Putin responded by saying, "It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone." Now, look, I'm all for self-defense. I'm more of a just war theory kind of a guy rather than a pacifist. But I don't think invading other countries, such as Ukraine or Georgia or other parts around the world, sending out their mercenaries to every part of the world, I don't really call that an act of self-defense. So that kind of baffles me. But what was even worse is, Putin then tried to riff off Dostoevsky by claiming that the Russian version of Christianity is more spiritual than the pragmatic natures of Westerners, which is why Westerners don't understand Russia. Russians are just too spiritual. I've met some very spiritual Russians in my life, but I wouldn't say that it's of a different species of spirituality compared to everything else. Now, when it comes to the relationship between the Kremlin and the Russian Orthodox Church, particularly Patriarch Kirill, who's the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, I would really recommend here a good book by Catherine Kolidas and her book, Holy Russia, Holy War, Why the Russian Church is Backing Putin Against Ukraine. And there's one thing that she said in the book that I found very striking. She said this: "The threat that Patriarch Kirill poses to the West is not because he seeks to baptize the secular order as he would have you believe. He is a threat because he has allowed the Russian Church to become completely co-opted by the Kremlin." Now, there is a technical word for that, and it's Caesaropapism. That's the word. Government control of a state-sanctioned religion. For me, the Carlson-Putin interview confirms what I've long suspected. The world is becoming divided between the forces of autocracy and liberal democracies. While Christians can live within, many different types of government, ranging from constitutional monarchy to, even a Muslim caliphate in some cases, I believe liberal democracy is not merely conducive to Christianity, it's directly spawned out of Christianity. And that's why I think, Christians or people committed to Western civilization with certain Christian themes running through it, they should be committed equally to resisting autocratic regimes and defending instead the virtues and excellencies of liberal democracy. Now, please indulge me here. I want to do a bit of a shameless promo. Topics like this, the war in Ukraine, possible conflicts in Taiwan, thinking about Israel and Gaza, the rise of Christian nationalism, even progressive authoritarianism. That's why Tom Wright and I wrote this book, Jesus and the Powers, because we want to think about political theology in a global context. What does it mean to resist, autocratic regimes of the political left and the political right? But anyway, that's my thoughts for this week on political theology. Hope you've enjoyed the show, and I hope that this has got you at least thinking critically about the Carlson and Putin interview. Now, maybe this is confirmed some of your suspicions about Carlson, but if you're more sympathetic to that way of doing business or that way of viewing the world, I hope I've at least raised some questions for you to consider. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and yeah, I hope to see you around the channel. Check out some of the other programs as well. Until then, take care.